Server-side includes are one of the most powerful features of PHP. Simply put, they do the same for HTML as external style sheets do for CSS. Just change one file and it updates the content of all associated files. Let's take a look at a really simple example. I've loaded this page into a browser and I'm just going to zoom in so we can see the text more clearly. The first paragraph says that it's in the original HTML. But the second paragraph says it's in an external file. And then the third paragraph says it goes back to the original HTML. So let's view the page source. If you look at line 12, that's the paragraph that says it's in an external file, but it looks as though it's an integral part of the HTML. Let's go back to our page and look at page 2. Here, the first paragraph says it's in an external file, but the second one is in the original HTML. And if we check the page source again, line 12, that's the paragraph that's in the external file, but it looks as though it's an integral part of the HTML. So let's see how this is done in my code editor. There on line 12 is a PHP code block, and it uses the command include, and it refers to includes/external.php. On page 2, exactly the same code block is there, and that's what's including the external file, which is here external.php. And note that it contains only a snippet of HTML. One of the most common mistakes with server-side includes is to leave the doc type, HTML, head and body tags in the file. A server-side include isn't like an iframe. It's not an independent web page. It's part of the actual web page. And you can use multiple server-side includes in a page, and the web server pulls everything together to form a single web page, rather like a jigsaw puzzle with no pieces left over. So let's make some changes to this external.php. I'm going to add a little heading, and then another paragraph. And then if we save that, and go back to the browser and get to that original page, reload it. There it is on page 2. And if I go to page 1, exactly the same content is included in page 1. So that's how server-side includes work. Let's just go back and look at the external PHP file again. Notice in my files I've put it in a folder called includes. It's common to store server-side includes in a separate folder, and this makes for easier maintenance. And although the file contains only HTML, I've used .php as the file name extension. Even if the external file contains PHP code, the file name extension is actually unimportant. Once it's been included in a PHP file, it becomes part of that PHP file, and all that PHP is interested in is finding the file. Some people try to distinguish include files by giving them the file name extension .inc, but I think that this is a bad idea because most web servers display .inc files as plain text, and as a result, passwords and other sensitive information in include files could accidentally be exposed. So this has been a deliberately trivial example to demonstrate how server-side includes work. But I hope you can imagine how useful they are in serving common page elements to multiple pages in a website. An include file can contain anything that you would put normally in a web page, HTML, PHP code, or a mix of the two. In this example, I used the command called include, here on line 12. But PHP actually has 4 commands for server-side includes, and we'll look at the differences next. PHP has not only 1 command for server-side includes, but 4. Let's take a look at how they differ and what happens when an include file can't be found. The 4 commands are include, require, include_once, and require_once. They all do basically the same thing. They include the content of an external file in another page or in a PHP script. As a web designer, the only time you're likely to need include once or require once is if you're working with a programmer. Redefining a function or class generates a fatal error in PHP. So the once versions are intended to prevent that from happening in a complex programming environment. So that basically reduces your choice to just the first 2, include and require. The difference between them boils down to what happens when the include file can't be found. What include means is, look, I'd really like to include this file, but if you can't find it, just keep going. Require, on the other hand, is used in the sense of, look, I'm really going to be stuck if you can't find this file, so you may as well give up right now if you can't find it. In other words, require has a sense of being mandatory. If the file can't be found, the script goes no further. But if you're using include, the rest of the script is executed, even if the include file can't be found. Let's see what happens in practice. I'm going to switch to my browser. In my browser, I've loaded this page, which contains a server-side include. The list comes from a server-side include, and it says the final paragraph is in the original HTML, and it should be displayed even if the external file can't be found. This page uses the include command. The other page includes the same unordered list, but it uses the require command, and the final paragraph says it'll be displayed only if the external file can be found. Well, obviously the external file can be found in both cases because it's displaying correctly. So let's introduce a deliberate error into the scripts. Go into my editor, and on line 12, there is the include command. In this page, include.php, I'm using the include command, and it's including the includes/list.php file. So let's change that to lists and save that, and then go to the require.php page. It's exactly the same server-side include that's being included, but this time it's using require. Let's just change that to lists.php as well. Save that and then go back to the browser, and if I go to the include page and reload it, we get these rather ugly warnings here which say it's failed to open stream, which means basically it can't find the file. You can learn in more detail about what these error messages mean in the chapter on handling error messages, which is later on in the course. The important thing to notice here is I'm using include, and the final paragraph is in the original HTML and it is still being displayed. But if we go to require and reload that, we get similar warning messages, but that final paragraph is not displayed. In other words, once it's got to require, it can't find the file, it then just gives up completely. Now, there are a couple of other things that I'd like to point out about using server-side includes, so let's go back to my editor. This command on line 12, sometimes you'll see that require and include, the path is inside parentheses like this. And if I change that back to the correct name and then just save it, go back to my browser and reload it, you'll see that it works exactly the same way as before. So the parentheses, they're entirely optional. And when something is optional, I recommend that you leave it out. So you can just leave that out. The other important thing to notice here is I've used a path relative to the current document to indicate the location of the include file. This is very important. It's all to do with where PHP looks for external files. PHP looks for external files in several places following a strict order of precedence. The rules can be difficult to remember, but you won't go wrong if you follow these basic principles. Use a path that's relative to the current document. Document relative paths always begin with just a file or folder name, or if you need to go up a level, they begin with .. If both files are in the same folder, don't use just the file name. Begin the path with .. This ensures that PHP looks only in the current folder. Don't use a path relative to the site root. Paths relative to the site root always begin with a .. Browsers understand them, but PHP doesn't. So let's keep things simple. If you're not sure which command to use, go for include. If you use require and the external file can't be found, PHP abandons the rest of the script. And always specify the location of the external file using a path relative to the current document. In the previous two videos, you've seen how server-side includes work and how the various include commands differ. Now it's your turn to put that information to practical effect. You can work with a site of your own, but if you're a premium subscriber, you'll find a folder called Hansel and Petal in the download files. It contains the case study I'll be using through the rest of this course. It's part of a site for a fictitious flower shop called Hansel and Petal, and it was originally built using HTML pages. I've already converted the file names and internal links to PHP pages, and to keep things relatively simple, there are only 9 pages. So if you want to try out the links, this one works, Arrangements, and then Mixed Arrangements. And then if we go into that menu again, Mixed Roses, Build a Bouquet, and Our Designers. These links all work. The challenge, should you wish to accept, is to examine the HTML in either this website or an existing website of your own and decide which common elements could be moved to external files. And when you've made your decision, convert the site to use server-side includes. If you browse through the site, it should become fairly obvious which elements are common to each page. For example, in this site, we've got the headings up here and the navigation. There might be other elements that are common to each page. Check through the HTML, decide what you want to move, then move one or more parts of the website to external files and include them in each page, using the most appropriate include commands. It shouldn't take you more than 10 or 15 minutes, but don't rush. It's more important to get it right than to race against the clock. And in the next video, I'll show you my solution.